Hello, you're listening to the Achieve With Me podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'm your host, Rachel Gilfrin, and I'll be spending the next few minutes chatting to you about what achieving, winning, and success mean to you. As a life coach, in my opinion, all of these things are very closely linked to having a positive mindset. And this has come up a lot for me in my journey towards success within my career. In fact, it still does. I'll be sharing my own highs and lows from the last 13 years of my career, plus a good deal of confidence and communication techniques that you can start implementing today. I really hope you enjoyed today's episode. Hello, and welcome to episode 14 of the Achieve With Me podcast. Now, today's episode is actually the penultimate episode of season 1 of Achieve With Me. I can't believe we're already on episode 14. It's absolutely flown by. So following this episode, there will be a final episode, which will be number 15, which will be a roundup of all the different things that we've talked about and learned. And hopefully this will just be a great reminder and also might prompt you to go back and re-listen to any of those episodes that might be particularly relevant for you at the time. So today's episode is all about waiting for permission to go after what you want. Now, this is a really interesting one because I think that although we like to believe that we're totally in control of what we do and that we do things at our own pace and when we want to, it's not always the case in real life. It takes a lot of really deep reflection and personal honesty to actually highlight where we are still sort of waiting for that external validation. One of the surefire things that happens along the coaching journey itself, with any client to be honest, is hesitancy. Now, I can almost predict exactly when it's going to happen, but nevertheless, it rears its head along that journey. So usually as part of the coaching relationship, to give you a bit of an overview, we'll start off with really getting to understand the truth behind what you're looking to achieve. Yes, we uncover the goals, but what we really work hard at is uncovering the real why behind the goals. After this, we'll work on understanding what's held you back in going for this before, if it's been a goal, then how come it's not happened yet? And look at disproving any limiting beliefs that you've previously loyally carried around with you without realising. More common than you realise. Now, once these key parts have been overcome, usually the client is feeling really positive and excited about the progress that they've made, which is a wonderful place to be. But once we start looking at putting the first steps into place, that is when the hesitancy starts to creep in. And here's why. When we set goals that involve moving out of our comfort zone, we've so often sought advice from others around us in the past. Now, this advice could be from our parents, any mentors we have, our friends, our significant other, anyone really, but I think that it's rare that when you make a decision that you're uncomfortable about, that you don't sort of seek advice from anybody around you. And then when we've seemingly removed the obstacles that were in the way of the goals, reality sets in. I haven't got any excuses behind me now. And in order to reduce hesitancy, which by the way is a perfectionist tendency, if you haven't already caught up with my episode on motivation and perfectionism, definitely recommend you do so. But in order to reduce this hesitancy that we experience, the best thing to do is focus simply on the first step ahead of you, rather than worrying about all the things that you still need to do to get to the end goal. And once you've done that, you can focus on step 2, simply in isolation, and then step 3 in isolation, and so on. But we don't do this typically. So often we get in the way of taking that first step because we want to get external validation on what our goal is. or perhaps the piece of work and actions that are included on the road to getting there. You might be thinking about publishing that piece of work and think, well, I'd feel much better if I knew people were going to like it before I did it. You could be going for an interview and think, well, if I knew I'd get the job, I'd feel more confident. You might be wondering about the decision that you're about to make and really wondering if it's the right one for you. Well, there's plenty of people that I can ask, but what if they tell me what I don't want to hear? Now, this back and forth worrying about what people may think is, quite frankly, a waste of your valuable time. But more importantly than that, nobody else is you. I'll repeat that again. Nobody else is you. And therefore, what use is their validation or permission? Even if everybody in the world told you that you were making the right decision, if you ended up not enjoying it or wishing you hadn't done it, would you wish you'd stuck to your own intuition? I think it's such a common trait when we do continually try and seek this validation or permission, because the funny thing is, nobody else lives our lives except from us. And you and only you know what's right for you. So, in this situation, my advice is stop waiting for that wise hand to appear on your shoulder and say, now is the perfect time. This is what you need to do. Because it just doesn't happen. And wisdom is only in the eye of the beholder as well. So we've talked before about people giving their opinions on things that you're doing, but they just haven't lived anywhere near the same life that you have. So it's just not as relevant. Work out what you truly want to do and go after it. Now, we started off by talking about the coaching relationship. And I guess if you have been working with a coach, it's going to be a lot more efficient and easier to get to the bottom of what's been really stopping you from going after the goal, or what has stopped you in the past at least. But it really is so important to understand how you feel, because the truth will set you free. Now, one of my favourite mantras is get the facts. Now, I genuinely don't believe there's any situation at all in life where stopping ourselves and looking at what we know for certain and ignoring any assumptions or stories we might be telling ourselves, I don't believe there's any situation that this process doesn't improve. Because being honest with yourself is the best thing that you can do to really stand a chance of getting unstuck and to stop seeking permission from someone else. So, obviously, as I've said, if you're working with a coach, it's a really efficient process to get to the bottom of this with that guidance. But if you're not, it can be quite difficult to know where to begin. So, as you know, I love a bit of journaling. So I have devised some journaling prompts that you can use to really help you get to the bottom of what's going on. So my recommendation is grab your journal and a pen and write out the following statements. And underneath each of these statements, write your responses and keep writing until you really feel like you've got everything out. It can sometimes be tempting to just sort of answer the questions. So don't write them all out on the page and only leave yourself a certain amount of space. Write them out individually, then your response, and then write the next one and then your response, if that makes sense. So the first prompt is, what is the one thing that is keeping you stuck or blocking you at this stage? So then you'll write out your response to that. Now the second prompt is going to be, why? Really simple, but it really helps you to kind of, when you ask yourself a question, it helps you to try and be forced into finding the response. And you do know the response, but sometimes it can be buried in your subconscious mind. Now, the next prompt is, what's the reason behind this? Quite similar, but again, it just helps you to think about things differently. The fourth prompt is, how can you solve this? So really getting to that solutions-focused mindset and look at ways in which that you could proactively do something to try and solve the blockage that you've got at the moment. And then the final prompt is, what is the first step you are going to take to move forward with this? So really helpful because, as we talked about before, focusing on taking the first step is so much less daunting than looking at the whole series of events that you're going to need to follow to get to past the blockage and to reach the goal. Now, this is a really good thing to do if you are feeling a bit stuck, but let's be honest, sometimes depending on the mood you're in when you're doing it or the level of privacy that you've got when you are doing this journaling process, you don't always get ultimate clarity the first time you do it. So what I would recommend is, if you don't find that you get this clarity or you don't feel like you've got to the bottom of it really, try going through this sort of self-coaching process again in a week's time. Giving yourself time to reflect will most likely help to unstick some of the thoughts and feelings that you have around achieving your goal. So, short and sweet episode this week. I think it's really important just to stop looking at other people's permission to go ahead and do things. You are the only person that has to live with the consequences of your decisions. And that might sound a bit daunting and dark, but what I mean by that is anybody can give you advice about the ways in which that it could change your life, but the ways in which that it could change your life that are incredibly positive tend to be the ones that people don't focus on. So do bear that in mind when you are looking at making a decision and potentially moving away from your comfort zone. So thank you so much for tuning in again. If you like what you heard, please do leave me a rating and a review. And if you're not already following me on social media, it's at Rachel Harriet Coaching on Instagram. And do remember that I also offer free discovery calls if you are considering looking at any coaching options moving forward. Thanks very much. Thank you so much for listening to the Achieve With Me podcast. As I mentioned at the beginning of today's episode, I am going to be moving into a new season. So it's going to be season 2 of Achieve With Me, and I would absolutely love to hear from all you listeners about any particular topics that you would love to hear about. So if you're not already, please do follow me on Instagram at Rachel Harriet Coaching, and I would love to hear about anything that you would like to be covered off on this podcast. Thanks very much.